Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time of day it is, I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is the Dread Pirate Parker. Yeah! All right, so my quest for the Death Masks begins. But what would any new series be without that second episode distraction or tangent, right? So I just had too much fun recording this one to leave it out, right? So have fun, guys. All right, so now Falcon's Maze for Death Masks is, of course, Wikipedia. I expect to go a little bit deeper, but we'll see. Death mask is a likeness, typically in wax or plaster cast, of a person's face after their death, usually made by taking a cast or impression from the corpse. Death masks may be mementos of the dead or be used for creation of portraits. It is sometimes possible to identify portraits that have been painted from death masks because of the characteristic slight distortions of the features caused by the weight of the plaster during the making of the mold. Now, that's kind of interesting because, again, without having read this before, it definitely, seeing this impression here and the look on the faces of so many of those founding fathers, maybe those portraits were created using death masks. I don't know, because this is a very stark image here. And again, the expression along the nose and the mouth here. This like chin design. Maybe I'll try to bring up some founding father pictures to edit in here, and that's exactly what I did. On the right, we have this very famous portrait of George Washington, and on the left, we have the death mask of the star of this episode, Richard Parker. And now I'm not saying that this is an exact match, but, part of me wants to believe that the death mask of Richard Parker was the model and the basis for the paintings of George Washington because so many of them, almost all of them, rock the same kind of stoic look on the lower half of the face, right? Look at the pressed lips here and the chin, even the nose is really kind of similar. I don't know. And again, right, I'm not saying that this is an exact match, but it's certainly enough to make me think that all the portraits and drawings we have of our founding fathers could have actually been based on plastered death masks or wax figure portraits. So I guess it's a good thing that Wiki puts that death masks were used in portrait making, because I think I'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that doesn't believe that this is a portrait that G-Dubs actually sat for. It's really unbelievable. And so here we go with the tale of Richard Parker. I thought that was kind of interesting, so I wanted to see, well, who is this guy? It's such a striking figure, Richard Parker, that he would be the first image you see under the Death Mask Wikipedia article, the gatekeeping article on death masks. That's the first thing you see. So who is he? Maybe he's related to William Parker, the Duke of Baron Monteagle. Guy Fawkes the bane of Guy Fawkes' existence, right? The man who received the anonymous letter. Parker also, we know now, at least one branch of them could be cousins to the Stanleys and the Duke of Derby. So who knows? Maybe some relation after all. But I wanted to find out more, because again, this is the first image you see for death masks. Why him? And his is kind of a really interesting story. And the woodcut or etching or whatever they have of him here is Richard Parker about to be hanged for mutiny. And this is in 1797. Richard Parker was an English sailor executed for his role as president of the so-called Floating Republic, a naval mutiny in the Royal Navy which took place at the Nore between the 12th of May and the 16th of June, 1797, or so for 4 or 5 weeks, the late spring of 1797. And so he was born in Devon, so now here we have a possible connection to the Poes maybe somewhere, with the Poe line being so connected to Devon. Right? And he dies on the HMS Sandwich. The ignoble deaths. Dying on the HMS Sandwich. Has to be one of them. And so let's see, his early life. Now, born in Exeter, the son of a successful baker, he was apprenticed as a navigator in 1779. And from 1782 until 1793, he served on various ships of the Royal Navy, mainly in the Mediterranean and India service, achieving the rank of master's mate and a probationary period as lieutenant. I mean, that's 11 years he's in the Navy here. So he rises through the ranks, he becomes a probationary lieutenant. But in December of 1793, he was serving as a midshipman aboard another vessel here. aboard the HMS Assurance when he refuses an order to clear away his hammock at daybreak. Parker's refusal to follow the order led to a court-martial for insubordination and a reduction to the rank of seaman. It's just impossible to do without laughing. I tried. He was eventually discharged from the Navy in November 1794. So discharged after a court-martial. So this has to be a dishonorable discharge, or whatever the royal equivalent of that is, right? So he returns to Exeter to reunite with his wife Anne, but he struggles to earn a living and finds himself in debtor's prison in early 1797. Right? And after 3 weeks in jail, he accepts a quota of £20 in return for reinstatement in the Navy. So he essentially sells his soul to the British Navy for 20 quid in 1797. It says that his despair was so great that he attempts suicide on the way by flinging himself overboard. Right? That's unbelievable. He's that desperate. Right? He gets the 20 quid to get out of debtor's prison. He has to leave his wife again, whatever that may be worth or not to him. And he throws himself overboard on the way to the ship. Right? And the ship that he was assigned to is this HMS Sandwich, which was widely regarded as one of the worst in terms of its squalid and overcrowded conditions. Right? And it was on the Sandwich that on May 12, 1797, the Nore Mutiny broke out. And the Nore was one of the bases of the North Sea Fleet. I'm guessing, the way the story plays out, I'm guessing somewhere near the mouth or base of the Thames. The mutiny breaks out on the Sandwich on the 12th of May, right? But Parker played no role in organizing the mutiny, but he was soon invited by the mutineers to join their ranks and was subsequently appointed president of the delegates of the fleet due to his obvious intelligence, education, and empathy with the suffering of the sailors. And now this is really an amazing thing because he was so desperate and so poor that he tries to commit suicide on the way. Right? But he gets on this boat and the other sailors, but the mutineers immediately see the potential in him to be their leader. That's absolutely incredible. I don't see Patsy written all over this at all. It says that his degree of control, Parker's this is, over the direction of the mutiny was limited. Right? His role as president was largely symbolic, mainly involving supervision of the processions of delegates in boats that plied between the involved ships for communication and morale purposes. So there was a bunch, again, this plays out very loosely here on his wiki page, and I'm not going to go any further than this for this fun little episode. And so the way this plays out, there are a bunch of ships involved in this mutiny in 1797. And so this is that supervision that he is overseeing or whatever he's doing, right, between the couple of boats that are in cahoots, right? And so despite the chaotic nature of the mutiny and his ill-defined powers, Parker did manage to exert control, as on the 2nd of June, think about 2 6s, when the sloop HMS Hound arrived at the Nore and was boarded by a party of delegates. Now, it's kind of confusing here, but this party of delegates are these mutineers, led by Richard Parker. The Hound's crew and commander violently resisted this intrusion, but Parker's arrival and display of authority quickly convinced the captain to submit and join the mutiny. And this just reads so false to me, so hokey. This so plays out like that Hollywood comical cowardly stereotype of the British captain, always cowering under the threat of piracy and the threat of physical danger. Right? That's what's happening. That's what seems to be happening here with this story. And so on the 6th of June, again 2 6s, and this mutiny led by the brave president, Richard Parker, they put on a blockade of the Thames where only ships bearing a pass signed by Parker were allowed through without being stopped and searched. And so this lasts for 4 days when on June 6th, he organizes a meeting of the delegates with Lord Northesk, to whom he handed a petition and a form of ultimatum that their grievances be addressed within a period of 54 hours, after which he warned, such steps by the fleet will be taken as will astonish their dear countrymen. But this appears to be a step too far. Lord Northesk appears to be in charge of a big-time Navy vessel, right? And And I think this ultimatum period is interesting. 54 hours, that's 4.5 days. That's kind of like an oddball time frame for an ultimatum. I don't know, just something about it, right? But now there's tension here because this Lord Northesk, or whoever he is, right? He is apparently in charge of a high-powered Navy vessel, right? And so this puts the fear in some of the other sloops, right? And they don't care for this declaration that the steps taken by the fleet will astonish their countrymen, meaning there'll be high violence and murder, right? And so they bail. The Royal Navy comes in, and during this period of 54 hours, the Navy closes in. They think Parker may escape. They put a bounty out on him, but of course, he doesn't go anywhere. He's put up as the offering. He's the scapegoat, the fall guy. Yeah, right. He's the effigy for this ritual. Right, so he's arrested on the 13th of June, which is interesting because now you can actually make that into 3 6s, if you were so inclined. So he's brought to Sheerness to the Navy base under heavy guard, and then he's taken to the HMS Neptune, right, the flagship of Commodore Sir Erasmus Gower, where he was court-martialed, found guilty of treason and piracy, and sentenced to death. Now this is interesting. They remove him from the Sandwich, bring him to the base, only to bring him out to sea for his court-martial and trial. Very interesting when you kind of tie that in to the idea of how prevalent naval law is, and could be in our modern world. After he's sentenced, right, he's brought back to the Sandwich to be executed, and that happens on June 30th. So again, more 3s and 6s. It's really kind of amazing, right? But they say his body was not publicly gibbeted after death, contrary to the wishes of King George III. All right, so the King George, and so gibbeting is the use of a gallows-type structure from which the dead or dying bodies of criminals were hanged on public display as a deterrent. So they were going to crucify this guy, and so the good King George III, he wants to see this guy publicly gibbeted. He wants Richard Parker to be made an example of. And it says that his wife, Anne worked tirelessly to prevent this execution. And we can take that in so many ways. How tirelessly did she work? What did she actually do? Because she really is a non-factor in the gatekeeping story here. But allegedly, she goes so far to rescue his body from an unconsecrated burial ground and smuggled into London, where crowds gather to see it. It must have been a sensation, right? I'm sure this pirate story of the 3 or 4 boats, or however many it was, that blockaded the Thames for a few days was quite the story, quite the diversion from something else that could have been going on in London or in royal politics or foreign affairs, at the time. These types of stories used exactly the same way they're used today. This story was a diversionary tactic, this Nore mutiny. And so after receiving Christian rites, the body was buried on the grounds of St. Mary Matfelin. And I think that's interesting. We're in Matfelin Church, Whitechapel. Right? An entry in the burial registry for St. Mary's Whitechapel, dated the 4th of July, 1797, reads, Richard Parker, Sheerness, Kent, aged 33. Right? The cause of death, execution. This was Parker, the president of the mutinous delegates on the board of the fleet at the Nore. Right? He was hanged on board HMS Sandwich on the 30th day of June. Right? So 4 days she has his body. Right? And so when it's in this period that this mask is made, of course, it's interesting that the body of this Wikipedia article doesn't mention the death mask at all, yet the death mask is the first thing shown on the death mask wiki page. I find those types of things kind of interesting. But I just wanted to show you that on St. Mary's, on the funeral certificate, it said that he was 33. But wiki here, given his birth and death day, April 16, 1767, died June 30th, 1797, at age 30. So what's going on with that? Was he 33? Was he 30? Again, just more wonkiness with the dates. How are these things not being caught? Just sloppy. And so speaking of sloppy, I'm going to close this one out with a few more thoughts on Marie Tussaud and death masks, right? And did Marie Tussaud ever make a mold of George Washington? Could Marie Tussaud be responsible for Richard Parker's death mask? Could Richard Parker be the model used for George Washington? And could Richard Parker be a fabrication of history created just at a time when this death mask needed to disappear into history. And what better way to cement right, your phony mutiny story than with a death mask? Who knows? I don't know, but I think this little bit of comparison clearly shows that Richard Parker looked a hell of a lot like George Washington, or the image that we associate with George Washington may not be George Washington at all. And this begs the question, did Marie Tussaud make plaster molds as well? There are plenty of videos out there on YouTube, do-it-yourself videos on how easy and cheap it is to make plaster molds of your head so you can create your own masks and cosplay and things like that. Or your own movie effects, if that's the way you want it to go, right? It's very easily done today. How long has plaster molding or plaster itself been around? And so the narrative tells us that plaster was invented sometime around 7500 BC or during Neolithic man, right? And here's Çatalhöyük. They were using plaster in Çatalhöyük, just as they were probably using plaster to make the phony Neolithic man that they have as part of. This isn't for Çatalhöyük. I believe this phony Neolithic man is in Stonehenge. But the principle is the same. How they sell us this story of what these people look like. They use these plaster molds just as Marie Tussaud did, just as the staging of these executions and what our founding fathers and what the royals looked like back in the day could quite literally be phony figureheads. It's just really unbelievable. The Romans had plaster, they used it, and by Marie Tussaud's time, there's definitely a plaster out there that they are putting into boxwood molds. So molds are definitely being used in art at this time. So who knows? Maybe Marie Tussaud did do that. But she would have been more than just the plaster caster of that era, because it's not Madame Tussauds plaster museum, it's Madame Tussauds wax museum. She did wax sculptures. And so we're going to pick it up with the story of wax sculpting in the next episode of Baltimore Fat's House of Wax. All right. So remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? And we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers, guys.